Echoing through the hills of central Washington, just west of the Cascade Range, is an unmistakable sound. A sound that rings familiar to rail fans around the world. The whistle of a steam locomotive. And as this locomotive thunders down the tracks past one of America's most famous mountains, its passengers soon realize why it's called the Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad. The railroad was established in 1980 by the Western Forest Industries Museum, a non-profit corporation. The original group operated the train until 1984, when it changed over to current management. As a tourist railroad, the Mount Rainier Scenic is one of a rare breed, a link back into our past when trains were the norm and powerful steam engines pulled passengers and freight from coast to coast. Today, the train operates on weekends from Memorial Day to the end of September and daily from June 15th to Labor Day. After careful maintenance and routine checks are performed by the dedicated staff who run the operation, the train is ready for its first run of the day. Anticipation runs high amongst people who have arrived from all over the country to ride this historic railroad. Many are riding a steam locomotive for the first time, while others, who remember the days when trains were still a means of daily transportation, anticipate stepping back in time to get reacquainted with an old friend. One of the first things most people notice on a train are its sounds, the clickety-clack of the tracks, the creaking of the cars, and the unmistakable whistle that lets everyone know a train is coming. The railroad operates on tracks leased from Weyerhaeuser Corporation and runs a 14-mile stretch from the beautiful little town of Elbe, Washington to Mineral Lake and back. On most days, the engine is a 1924 Porter Mikado 282, but every so often, when the Porter is in for service, a rare 1930 Heisler is called to duty. The scenery quickly turns to beautiful emerald green hills covered with towering evergreen trees. Wildlife is abundant. This is logging country, and much of the track was originally laid by timber companies. In this corner of the country, trains and logging have a rich and colorful history dating back to the 1880s when steam first arrived in the woods. Previous to that, horses and oxen were used to pull the logs out. It was a slow and inefficient process. With the arrival of steam, the logging railroad was born. Early operations were crude and often consisted of a mile or two of track laid from the river's edge to the logging site. With the arrival of mainline railroads, the logging company had a way of getting the logs to the sawmill and markets and no longer needed to rely on rivers for transportation. Railroads flourished. On the often flimsy and steep tracks laid in the woods, the preferred engines were gear type, manufactured by companies like Shea, Climax, and Hyflux.
Important to be ready for whatever tomorrow may bring.
The work was hard and often dangerous, but none sought employment outside the woods as long as it was available. As trains slowly gave way to modern diesel trucks in the 50s, the era of railroad logging became history. As the locomotive slowly chugs by reminders of logging days gone by and over crystal clear streams, passengers eagerly await their first views of spectacular Mount Rainier. Then suddenly, as the train crosses the beautiful Nisqually River Bridge, the mountain appears from behind the foothills. At 14,410 feet, Mount Rainier is the highest peak in Washington State and the fifth highest mountain in the continental USA. Founded in 1899, the national park was the fifth created in this country and hosts many thousands of visitors every year who marveled at the size and majesty of the mountain. On the beautiful surrounding countryside, Mount Rainier boasts the largest single mountain glacier system in the lower 48 states. It has 26 in all. It also holds the record for snowfall when the winter of 1971 to 1972 over 93 feet fell at Paradise Lodge. Many picturesque waterfalls, creeks, and rivers are fed by the immense Cascade volcano that is permanently snow-covered and can be seen for over 100 miles on a clear day. Few mountains in North America figure so prominently in legends and folklore or have as colorful a history as the stately peak. Because of its close proximity to the national park, it is not uncommon for passengers on the train to get a glimpse of elk and deer browsing in adjacent meadows, and occasionally spot black bears running across the tracks. Although the railroad possesses 3 engines, a porter, a climax, and a heisler, the day-to-day duties usually fall on the porter. This engine was originally built in 1924 by the H.K. Porter Company of Pittsburgh, a company known more for its small and narrow-gauge engines. At 71 tons, the 282 Mikado, used by the Rainier Scenic, is thought to be the largest of its make currently in operation. The engine was originally purchased by Carlton and Post in Western Oregon and was put to work on a 55-mile branch line hauling lumber. Eventually, it ended up in Aberdeen, Washington as a switch engine. The Porter is an oil burner and was originally designed to burn Bunker C. Today, it runs on waste oil, usually collected from the crankcases of trucks and cars. Its top speed is around 30 miles per hour. After its stint at Aberdeen, Carl Schaefer of Schaefer Brothers Lumber Company put the engine on display at his ranch near Montesino. When Schaefer passed away, the engine was donated to the Rainier Scenic, where it underwent a restoration that lasted for a year and a half. Old steam engines like the Porter are proof that the familiar saying, "they don't build them like they used to," is so true. With a generous application of grease and a little tender-loving care, this engine, which is nearly 70 years old, runs like a true thoroughbred down the tracks. Because the Rainier Scenic doesn't have a turntable, every other run is made with the engine pulling the cars in reverse or tender first, which can be an interesting sight to viewers seeing it for the first time. Passenger cars came from the Southern Pacific and were used in the Bay Area as commuter cars. Watching an old steam locomotive thundering down the tracks is an impressive sight, a sight that elicits a response in even the most casual of observers. For here in front of our eyes is an important piece of American history. For those who desire the ultimate train experience, the Mount Rainier Scenic offers its famous weekend dinner train. Running from late spring through November, the ride is a feast for both the eyes and the palate and features a fabulous 4-course prime rib dinner. In an authentic restored dining car, the staff worked diligently to ensure that the experience will not soon be forgotten. The food is expertly prepared in the kitchen, while the final touches are seen to in the dining area. Nothing is left to chance, and the guests will be pampered. The train leaves in the early evening and runs a 40-mile trip from Elby to Morton and back. The ride lasts 4.5 hours and travels through the scenic foothills of the Cascade Mountains. Outside the windows, passengers are treated to some of the prettiest sights the Northwest has to offer as the train makes its way through alternating landscapes of forests and meadows.
Ready, and Charlie here will punch a ceremonial hole in them. Larson?
After the diners are seated, the meal promptly begins with a fresh relish tray and beverages. The expert waitstaff keep the guests happy by attending to their every needs. As dining experiences go, this is one that Shirley rates very highly, for no in-city restaurant could ever match the spectacular scenery and wonderful ambience offered on a real dinner train. When the main course of sumptuous prime rib arrives, it is the perfect climax to a wonderful evening and an adventure in dining that will be remembered for a lifetime.
Washington State, at the foot of majestic Mount Rainier, rests the small town of Elby. It's the home home base for the Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad and its 14 miles excursion into the surrounding wilderness aboard one of a dying breed, an actual steam locomotive. Borobeck usually rides in the cab, where he is the engineer of a 1924 Porter, 3 times a day, 3 days a week. People come from all over the world to see and hear him talk of what it's like to be the engineer of a steam locomotive. Harold tells them of how the 71-ton engine was built in Pittsburgh for the Carleton and Coast Railroad, and is believed to be the largest porter existing. But he tells them something else too. He speaks of pride and dedication, of a love affair with the rails. So sit back and listen while Harold Borobeck tells what it's like to be a steam train engineer.
But I was 16 when I went to work for the railroad, and still in high school, and I've been messing around with them ever since. My favorite uncle was a steam locomotive engineer on the Northern Pacific out of Centralia, Washington, and naturally I wanted to follow in his footsteps. So during World War II, when there was a great shortage of men, he got me a job at the Centralia Roundhouse. He helped me learn all about locomotives by letting me ride with him and showing me how to run them and educating me. Also, when you work in a roundhouse, you get pretty well oriented with every kind of a locomotive that ever come into the place. Also, during this very same time, I was working for another railroad in Chehalis 2 hours a day. Well, the man that was master mechanic there was like a second father to me, and he took me under his wing and he tried to show me and teach me everything about steam locomotives. And of course, I was eager to learn about them because they were my favorite mechanical thing. So that's kind of where I got started. And from there, it just grew. I've worked on Malleys, I've worked on Climax locomotives, Heisler locomotives, Shea locomotives. It's about anything that's in existence. In fact, right here on this very own railroad here, we've run Shays and, we've run Climaxes and Heislers, rod engines. So we have quite a variety here that over the years, we don't run them all at once, but they're available to us. The fireman, he handles the oil controls that control the heat and temperature of the boiler. He also controls the water. So what he does is maintain steam pressure so that I have power to run the train. He makes the steam and I take it away. Now, of course, you notice the fireman, he does all the greasing and gets it ready to go, prepares it for the trip. We have to make sure we've got fuel, water, grease, supplies like that, so that we have an adequate supply for the day. As far as water is concerned, a whole lot depends on the size of the tender and the train you're pulling. Now, on the main lines, they probably had water tanks every 30, 40 miles, but they didn't always use them. I mean, you could skip them, depending on tonnage. Now, passenger trains, they would go long distances between water, maybe 100 miles. Well, if we'd start from a cold start, like after it's been chopped or boiler washed or something, it takes about 4 hours. But overnight, when we come to work in the morning, it still has a certain amount of steam pressure left on it, like 50 pounds, and we're ready to go in an hour and a half. The only time we kill it is when we take it in for a boiler wash, which is about every 30 days. Well, we ordinarily operate at, say, 170 pounds, but it'll move at 125. It takes about 125 pounds to operate the air compressor, so we have brakes. It was designed to burn bunker C, which is like tar, road tar. And it was built that way when it was originally constructed. However, bunker C is hard to obtain. It's hard to handle because it's necessary to heat it so it's fluid and mobile. Otherwise, it sets up like tar. And so it's incomprehensible that we could handle it at this stage of the game. So we have found that by burning waste oil, drainings from crankcases of big trucks or automobiles either, works fine. It's in a fluid state. It burns very similar to bunker C. Of course, wood, they found out right off that wood was unsatisfactory because it took tremendous amounts. It was hard to obtain. They had to bring it and stack it by the tracks, and it took a long time to transfer it to the locomotive, and it didn't last long enough, and it threw a tremendous amount of sparks, and it just wasn't satisfactory. Well, of course, coal had been around a long time, and so it was real easy to transfer to coal. Coal was a lot easier to handle. You can handle it with conveyor systems and by dumping it in different ways, and it had a lot more heat content. It lasted longer. A tender full of coal, you could go a lot further, not have to have coaling stations every so many miles. They were further apart, and so it made it a lot more convenient. Now here on the western Washington, when I went to work there in Centralia in 1943, we didn't have an oil burner on the place as far as the Northern Pacific was concerned. The Union Pacific stabled locomotives there, and they were all oil. However, they ran through the state of Oregon, which had a law that you couldn't burn coal west of the Cascade Mountains because of fire hazard. So, and then gradually the Northern Pacific felt that way about Western Washington as well. And during or right after World War II, they started converting everything west of the mountains to oil. And I don't think it was any cheaper for them. It might have been a little, but it mainly was fire hazard. And also the engines they ran into Portland had to be oil burners. So it just made it a lot more convenient. It's a lot easier to handle, and oil is a lot safer fire-wise. I mean, it doesn't throw a lot of sparks. Coal can be a very hazardous thing with sparks and ashes flying into the air, dropping on the ground and starting fires. So oil is much safer that way. And it's a lot easier for tourist railroads to handle. Coal. Now, you go back east, and there isn't an oil burner in it, in hardly any of the tourist railroads. For one thing, I don't think they realize or understand how to handle them. There's been one or two back there, and most of them they converted them to back to coal because they said they didn't function properly. Well, it's just because they don't understand them, I think. It's kind of, you have to be familiar with a product and a machine in order to make it work. But we wouldn't have it any other way. Out here we're relatively clean, and once in a while. Now, in order to clean our flues, coal is self-cleaning because you got cinders running through the flues, scouring them out. We don't have that, so we have to run sand through the flues periodically. Well, when you do that, you get a cloud of black smoke and sand in the air. And we try to do that when there's no passengers aboard in a more or less discreet area, so it doesn't bother anybody. There's a tremendous draft through the firebox, and there's a little small hole about so big around in the fire door, and you just pour it through that hole, and the suction just pulls it right through the flues, and it scours them out.
How often do you do that?
Well, we try to do it a couple of times a week. So on the main line, they did it several times per trip.
Yeah.
But see, bunker C had a lot more sooty aspect to it, and it sooted up the flues more often. So whenever they get on a tough pull going up a hill, that's when the firemen they had like a sugar scoop, and they'd just scoop it out of a box and put it over by this hole, and it'd suck it right out of that scoop right into the firebox. We have to artificially do it by setting the brakes on the train and working the engine real hard to get this tremendous draft that we find necessary to do it. Otherwise, the sand will just go in and drop in the firebox, and that'll be the end of it. If it has a little steam on it, it's very simple. You have to have steam or air to atomize the oil. That means to spray it, to make it kind of into a fog. And so as long as it has 20 pounds of steam pressure, you can fire it off. So mainly the first thing you do is open up all your steam lines because at night you shut everything off. And so you open them up and you run steam through them to warm up the pipes so that the steam that comes out doesn't condense, turn to water. So you've got to have steam in order to atomize the oil. It won't work with water or hot water. So you get all of the atomizer line nice and warm by just running steam through it. It'll first come out as water because the pipe is cold and the steam will condense. So once you get it, you watch it, you can see it as soon as it's a nice spray. Then it's just a simple matter of taking an old greasy rag and put a little kerosene or diesel oil on it, light a match to it, throw it in the firebox, turn on the oil valve, and when you see a little oil come in, atomize it. When it hits that fire, it blossoms into flame, and you're in business. And then as you increase the steam pressure, as the steam pressure builds up, you have to keep cutting back on your atomizer because the steam pressure is greater and it automatically gives you more atomizer than what you had 10 minutes ago. So your oil valve is set and it remains static, same amount of oil coming in. So as the steam pressure comes up, you either have to increase the oil or cut down on the atomizer. So somebody has to be around the engine. You can't just walk away from it.
So what if the engine was dead cold and didn't have any pressure? What's the procedure then?
We'd use the same procedure except we use compressed air instead of steam. And this is the beauty of burning waste oil. With Bunker C, you couldn't do that. You had to have a source of steam in order to heat the oil so it would actually flow through the pipes to get to the burner. But with this oil, it'll flow right to the burner at almost any temperature. So compressed air will atomize it. It doesn't do as good a job as steam will, but it does a fine job as far as firing up. So, and one thing about using an air compressor, once you set the fire, nothing changes. The air compressor continues to put out the same amount of air. The oil is the same. So you can actually go away from that a little further and be gone a little longer than you can when you're using steam. Okay, the largest gauge is the steam gauge, which registers the steam pressure in the boiler. I'm only concerned with that to the extent that there's enough steam there that I can run the locomotive. The fireman watches that same gauge and tries to keep the pressure up at our working pressure. There are two gauges for the air brakes. One indicates the main reservoir pressure, which is the big tanks you see there. That's the amount of air available for braking. It's reduced down to a lower pressure for the train line that goes through all the cars, and the brakes will automatically apply if anything reduces that pressure. In other words, if an air hose would break or somebody sticks a knife in an air hose or ice pick or something, it'll stop the train automatically. So it's a fail-safe type of situation. There's also a gauge for the independent brake, for the engine brake. It tells me how much cylinder pressure is on the engine brake. There's also another gauge up in the front that when you open the throttle, it tells you how much steam pressure you have in the cylinders. So you know what's available, and that can conceivably go up as high as the boiler pressure if you're really working the engine hard. Or in a stall situation, if the train is locked up, the brakes are set and you open the throttle wide open, that gauge will go all the way to whatever steam pressure is in the boiler. It's a very handy device so you know exactly where your throttle setting is. It's a double check. You can tell by feel where it is. You can also look at it and tell you where it is. The fireman has another gauge similar to that, so he kind of knows what I'm doing with the throttle, because each time you move the throttle, the steam pressure in the steam chest will vary, and he has to adjust his fire accordingly. So if I go down with my throttle, he goes down with his oil. If I go up with the throttle, he increases the oil. If he increases the oil too fast, you get black smoke. So he has a more critical job, in a sense, than what the engineer does, because he's following the engineer's every move and trying to anticipate. And then he also has to feed water to the boiler. And of course, when he does that, that knocks his steam pressure down. So he has to adjust all the time. He's always adjusting. You do have a little adjustment on your valve setting so that steam works by expansion. So if you shorten up the stroke of the valve, it only, one way of saying it is that when you have the thing in full stroke, it's taking big gulps of steam into the cylinders. When you hook it up, shorten the stroke, it takes little gulps. But those gulps expand and they work, and that's where you get your economy of your operation. If you left it down taking big gulps all the time, the fireman wouldn't be able to keep up with you. You'd use more steam than what he could make. It's not a matter of rust. Well, and there's a certain amount of rust takes place, but it's more of a matter of boiler scale. When you evaporate water, the impurities in the water stay in the boiler. You use the steam off of it, and these impurities collect in the bottom of it. So as we leave here or fire up each morning, we open a blow-off cock, and it blows a lot of that stuff out. But every 30 days, you have to take it to the shop and wash it out. Now, to cut down on the amount of impurities, we add boiler treatment to the water. We have a couple of different chemicals we put in there. One that reduces the amount of oxygen in the water, and the other one that keeps the solids in a suspended state. Instead of collecting on the sides of the boiler and all the stay bolts and flues and so on, it keeps them mobile. And then when you blow it out, they go off into the air, into the woods. Mechanically, the locomotive is practically flawless. Of course, each year or annually, you subject it to a hydro test to make sure that it's still got its original strength or close to it by using water, and you pressurize it to 1 1/4 times of what the working pressure is. So if it's gonna blow, we hope it blows then. Well, I just like to hear the locomotive run, for one thing. It's always nice to blow the whistle, of course. But one of the nicest things is just meeting the people that come to ride the train and seeing how happy they are to see a steam locomotive once again. A lot of people, elderly people, will tell you that they never in their fondest dreams thought they would ever be on one. And we allow them up in the cab to look around. Some of them even get a ride, and they're just ecstatic. They go home with a real blessing. And I think that's well worth it.
When the Porter is in for servicing, the Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad employs a 1930 Heisler West Coast Special. It was built to haul logs around the Pacific Northwest, weighs 90 tons, and operates at 185 pounds pressure per square inch. It offers a rough ride, but climb aboard and enjoy the trip.
Sure enough. You bet.
Bo's gonna let them know about this,
I'm all anyone.
I'm all right, one.